I've been back to thinking about Shadow Freddy a lot since the Shadow Stand video. One particular train of thought I kept having was, doesn't it kind of suck how many times a shadow theory has something about like, oh, Agony just balls up from an incident or something like that? Which I guess is fine-ish. Like, there's not evidence against it, it just is disappointing, I guess. But then I saw this post by Tarot Queen 27839. This post talked about the idea of Cake Bear, or specifically the association with Cake Bear, and Charlie's death is the origin of Shadow Freddy. The post is alright, but it's more important as the post that got me on the train of thought. Also, someone suggested that the post might be stolen from Glycon, a channel I've just learned about from this post. I watched the video and then went back to the post and kind of compared them, and I could see why people might say it was stolen. I personally didn't really get that. It sounded more like they both were running on the same general Shadow Freddy is born from Afton's crimes theory, and that overall leads to a lot of similar points because they are talking about the same general idea. It doesn't really matter if it was for the sake of this video, because it was more just the first time I thought about it in this context, and that kind of led me to like spitballing and building on this idea more and more. Both of those are things I thought about, and I will mention one thing I did like in the Glycon video is the idea that RWQ is afraid of Shadow Freddy / Nightmare, specifically the line, "The Shadow fears me." As I talked about in the Shadow Stand video, RWQ always seems to be on the side of the MCI kid. FNAF World support moves, attacking people in FNAF 2 is on the defense of the kids, FNAF 3's Happiest Day minigames, and orbiting around and protecting Remnant in FNAF AR. So him being afraid of Shadow Freddy, who seems to be on Team Afton or at least doing things that support Afton's actions, would make sense. For the main theory though, like I said, it started with me thinking about the idea of Cake Bear in association with Shadow Freddy. And then I thought about, it's kind of funky that Cake Bear's walking around giving cake to kids. We know animatronics can walk around, this has been a thing for ages, but he's actually giving cake to kids. With the exception of the Security Bridge era, that's not a concept really installed in the early series. It's almost always just like a cheap plastic cupcake looking thing. It's not like an actual cake you give out. So either this is another one of the weird ass feats of an animatronic being able to give cake to kids, or maybe there's someone in the suit. After all, the animatronic should just be performing its normal routes over and over. We even see this in Foxy Go Go Go. His behavior doesn't even actually change when he runs out. Yeah, the minigame stops and we get the jump scare, but the actual actions of Foxy are the same every time. So it's even weirder here that Cake Bear slows down as William approaches Charlie. I think what we're seeing is a person in a Fredbear costume watching Charlie die outside. Unable to leave the building to help her because of the rain outside, it will kill the person in the suit, and unable to get out of the costume in time because we know it's a bit of a clunky procedure that's not super convenient. You're also supposed to take off the costume in a dedicated room, which would mean the employee would have to go all the way to the back, towards the safe room, to take off the costume, then run out. While the original Give Cake minigame is pretty slow paced, the security puppet portrays it as something a lot quicker. Charlie's only there for a few moments before she fades away, and we know that means William killed her. So I heavily doubt an employee could get out of that costume in time, especially if they were previously busy and occupied helping kids and only noticed until after Charlie was out of the building. Now, you might think this would contradict Charlie dying at Freddy's, which is the theory I stood by a lot, but this is kind of one of those things when I thought about it and did it really? I've noticed there's a lot in FNAF communities where we get into the rhythm of having an argument, and sometimes one take doesn't even really matter in a certain context. Like, this could be Fredbear for all we care, but it could still easily be at Freddy's. Fredbear was at Freddy's. We know this from FNAF 3. You can't even argue, oh, it's a small building, so it's an early one before other characters were there. Foxy Go 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 exists. Obviously, there's not just a building that only has one Foxy, and obviously there isn't just one magical void room that only has the puppet and animatronics in it. So FNAF 2 is clearly taking a lot of creative liberty. That said, it is kind of disappointing that he's brown because... is there a normal Spring Freddy we didn't know about that this is unique to? But let's get more specific with who could be in the costume.
Connection terminated.
If he was like William, where he actively wore the costumes around the building, that explains our give cake behavior and him slowing down, and adds to Henry's line about,
"A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this."
So Henry being occupied giving cake to the kids and not even noticing Charlie left until it was too late, just seeing her through the window and then fade away, and then later learning that night she died, would lead to a lot of guilt. Now with Charlie's death and everything that would follow it, he feels directly responsible. If he wasn't busy with his work, he could have saved her. This also potentially redefines save him. A robot cannot consciously think about saving a kid like that, but someone in a suit could consider that. Now it becomes a direct request to Henry to do something, and depending on whether or not he recognized it was Charlie or not, he might not have done something because maybe it's just the Uncle Ben Spider-Man logic of, it's not my problem, and then it comes back to bite them for not doing something or standing up in the moment. If Henry had just put aside his work to help the kid outside, he could have prevented his own daughter from dying. And now we have a direct origin point for the emotions and the agony to actually be from someone in association with Freddy. He's literally wearing the costume. The feelings of powerlessness and regret of not doing anything, and a little bit of the selfishness of wanting to just get your work done and not helping a kid when you should have, not doing what's right, standing by and just letting something happen and watching, that feeling of almost compliance like you let it happen, those are all horrible emotions that could manifest as Shadow Freddy. He's not a spirit in the way that the MCI kids or Charlie is. A lot of times in ghost mythology, there's the sense of karma, or that a ghost's patterns represent what its behavior was in life. So the idea of Shadow Freddy being trapped with the memory of being powerless, just walking around and watching something happen, could explain why he physically doesn't really attack or hurt people directly, but instead walks or talks or manipulates things. It also makes sense to why Shadow Freddy might be on the side of Afton. If Henry is blaming himself and he feels complicit, like, I let this happen, it's my fault, those feelings could be the impetus for Shadow Freddy's behavior. It's almost like a curse repeating its process over and over. Shadow Freddy being created during this night also would explain Midnight Motorist, because that was one of the problems I always had with the Shadow Freddy theories. Cake Bear being there at all not only gives Shadow Freddy a plausible origin just by association, but if this is the creation night of Shadow Freddy, him appearing at Afton's home or moving around would line up. In every single appearance of Shadow Freddy, Afton is nearby or has some association with the location. In Follow Me, Afton's dismantling the animatronics. In FNAF 2, Afton is the Day Guard. Shadow Freddy is there. In FNAF 3, Afton is Springtrap. Shadow Freddy is there. In FNAF World, Springtrap is a character. Shadow Freddy is there. FNAF 1, Afton is no longer in the building or hasn't been there for some time. Doesn't appear. Sister location, Afton hasn't been there for a long time. Shadow Freddy doesn't appear. And hell, if Nightmare is Shadow Freddy, or depending on how that works is more accurately how I should phrase it, that's an experiment run by William where he is currently in the same overall building observing it. Shadow Freddy is there. While it's weird for him to jump straight to being Afton's home, I know that's an argument you could raise, is why would he go straight there right afterwards? That is weird, but it matches with his behavior. Also, with the FNAF movie proving that you can have physical presence despite being an ethereal ghost, we can finally explain why there's physical footprints and why they just seem to blink away. Shadow Freddy is a weird character who doesn't follow normal physics and rules as we think of them. He's a supernatural entity. It also explains why it seems like he just stood there outside. Not to mention, if we combine this with Michael Motorist, we can get a nice little bit of continuity with the nightmares. I've already theorized that Midnight Motorist is the direct prequel to the events of FNAF 4, or the original Nightmare Experiments, I should say. The room of the Nightmare Experiment seems to directly counter the behavior of the runaway. It has two doors that can't lock, that way the kid inside can only block one door at a time, so William can always have a way in. This is something that Orange Guy was furious about in Midnight Motorist. He couldn't get inside and the door was locked. No windows to break to run away. And Mike is the only character who is confirmed to interact with Nightmare Fredbear. We don't even have proof he physically exists in FNAF 4, which would mean for Nightmare to exist as Shadow Freddy in any context, Mike is the most likely candidate if he's mixing his fears of Nightmare Fredbear, something in his dream version of the events versus the real version of the events, which is fucking dumb. I hate Dittophobia for how it handled this. Then that makes Nightmare a Shadow Freddification of Nightmare Fredbear, which is once again so confusing. And if that's the case, then Michael Motorist is effectively a complete Midnight Motorist theory. It has detailed lore-heavy explanations for the Mound Juniors, the runaway's location and where he's going, who the runaway is, Orange Guy. The only thing really missing is Couch Person that, babysitter, Miss Afton, throw in whatever you want. And to be honest, the idea of Shadow Freddy, Afton's only real ally before Baby, being born the night he first killed, as his business partner he was trying to torment, watches on in horror in the last moments. I just think that's a pretty damn metal origin story. And think about this theory watching this moment.
I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms, the way you lifted others into yours.
Don't even argue like, oh, he doesn't say he saw it. What I'm arguing here is that he could be saying something like, I'm sorry I wasn't there to help you, when he's saying no one was there to help you. It could be a way of him apologizing, saying like, I'm sorry no one was there to help you, knowing that he himself could have been one of those people to help. This also lines up shockingly well with Henry's character in the novels. While I'm always a bit iffy translating characterization from the novels to games to other mediums in general, as each series kinda does its own thing with the characters, this does fairly line up. They're both neglectful fathers who are too absorbed in their work as their machines and things take over their life. Henry in the novel also wears the Fredbear/Gold Freddy suit, something that symbolically represents him being the bandmate of William who wears Spring Bonnie, which doubles down on what Henry said about William being an old friend. It also makes me wonder if Henry has some sort of trauma associated with the Fredbear suit, and that's the real reason for the multiple simultaneous Springlock failures. He might partially blame the costumes because he couldn't just quickly go out in the rain to grab the kid, because it's rain. Springlock suits will kill you if you go out in the rain. The only way he would be able to go out there to help that person that moment, and probably part of the thought process he had to justify not going out until it was too late, was, oh, it will take me a while to get this suit off, I have to go back and then run out to get this kid, then go back, and then I've got to go to my job, and the company will get mad at me if I do all of that. Him trying to make sure something like that never happens again, and also because these suits are just trouble in the first place, and once again, trauma associated with wearing that costume and him hating that costume after the fact, could lead him to wanting to get rid of these goddamn suits. It does raise the question of whether Henry in this timeline would know if it was William or not, but I kinda doubt it. He's also across the room staring out through the rain, so I could totally see some plausible thing where he can't really make out who did it, and later figuring out who it was is just such a brutal, great moment for him. To me, that adds a lot to his narrative and makes his character a lot more involved in the story rather than just a guy whose daughter died and he doesn't do anything about it for so long. I could totally see a Henry who just thought this was some brutal incident that he blamed himself for years, and the moment he figures out it's William, it's like, no, it's go time, I have to figure out what's going on with William and where he is. Then that leads to the cycle of him learning more and more about what's going on, cue the insanity ending stuff where he learns what happened. Then he learns who Springtrap is or what Springtrap is, cue FNAF 6, concluding his character. It explains why he isn't doing anything for so long. He didn't have all of the pieces in place until FNAF 6. Not to mention, this gives a great, really brutal origin story for Shadow Freddy that fits the character really well. Now, do I think this was the very original attempt with FNAF 2? Maybe a little bit. Maybe Scott had like an idea like, oh, maybe there's a person in the costume who just watches that the kid dies and then that becomes Henry later on. And maybe that's also kind of the origin of Shadow Freddy, of like this employee who didn't do anything, yada yada. I could see it easily be a Scott con that Scott added on to and expanded later. I also can't really think of any glaring issues with the theory, so I think this is a good point to end it on.